Hello, everyone. I'm going to give it just a minute to hopefully get a few more folks here. I know on the East Coast it's 5:30, but hopefully our West Coast people will make up for people maybe having to pick up kids or dinner. But, yeah, excited about this session. Lots of great presentations. I'll just wait till 5:31. Our first speaker will be Mojtaba, who will be talking about the solid waste optimization lifecycle framework in Python, which I'm very excited about as a useful platform. And why he's starting is because it's kind of a platform that can handle various materials, operations, and can be added to. So I'm hoping that it'll give us a perspective of thinking about modeling these complicated systems using life cycle data in a optimization type of framework. And then we have other talks about biorefineries. There's a little bit of diversity in the session here, but everybody is thinking about biological materials and or waste management. I'm also really excited about Cindy Azuero's talk that will be talking about biodiversity impacts instead of most of us are so much thinking about carbon that it's exciting to think about another and very complicated impact area. So should be a good session. I'll also tell everybody that I've asked the speakers to talk for 10 minutes with maybe one question in between talks. And then at the end, we will have all of our speakers will be on the podium. So it'll be all 5 of them and myself. And we'll answer questions more in a group, because I expect there'll be some questions that sort of overlap. So if you have a specific question, please enter it. If you have a generic question for the panel, also enter that, and we will get through as many as we can today. Okay, 5:32, so let's get going. A few more people have shown up. So our first speaker, like I said, is Mojtaba Sardarmehni. I'm sorry, I should have practiced before. Mojtaba. He's from North Carolina State University. He's a graduate research assistant in the Department of Civil Engineering. He's currently the lead developer of the solid waste optimization lifecycle framework. He has 4 years of experience as an energy auditor and is interested in sustainability analysis. Okay, so without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Mojtaba.
Well, thank you for your explanation, Dr. Costello. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen and start the presentation. My name is Mojtaba Sardarmehni, and today I'm going to talk about solid waste optimization lifecycle framework in Python, SwolfPy. So over 2 billion tons of municipal solid waste is generated annually, and this value is expected to grow to 3.4 billion tons of municipal solid waste by 2050. After the municipal solid waste is generated, there are different collection services to collect the waste, and after that, there are different pathways to manage the waste, including waste-to-energy processes to convert the waste to liquid fuels or electricity, landfills, recycling processes, and also biological processes to recover the nutrients from the organic waste. So solid waste management systems are evolving continuously to get more sustainable. However, it's very important to consider the interactions among the solid waste management system, energy system, and environment when we are planning to change them or add new processes. So our research objective was to develop an open source tool for evaluation of solid waste management systems while considering for changes to the solid waste composition or generation rate, solid waste management policy, energy system, and greenhouse gas mitigation policies. We also wanted to have built-in uncertainty analysis and built-in optimization feature. SwolfPy is built on top of the Brightway 2. Brightway 2 is an open source tool for performing lifecycle studies in Python. Here is an example of lifecycle process model in SwolfPy. We have different type of input data, and then we have the incoming waste, like for example, 1 megagram of food waste or 1 milligram of plastics. And then we process the incoming waste to waste products. The waste products can be physically separated, like the recyclables or residuals, or biologically or chemically transformed to other materials, like the bottom ash or the compost. We also have some direct emissions to the environment, which we call them biosphere, and the technosphere flows, including fuel use, electricity use, transportation use, or material use in solid waste management processes, which we are modeling them using the life cycle inventory data in life cycle inventory databases like EcoInvent. So the SwolfPy lifecycle process models calculate the lifecycle inventory data, and then we translate those results for the Brightway2 to create lifecycle inventory databases inside the Brightway2. And after that, we create exchanges between those databases in Brightway2, and then we can create scenarios by inside the Brightway2 and calculate the lifecycle impact of the scenarios with the Brightway2. SwolfPy has 9 lifecycle process models, including landfill, waste to energy, composting, anaerobic digestion, material recovery facility, reprocessing, transfer station, home composting, and single-family collection. And it's very easy to add new lifecycle process models for new processes or revise the current ones. SwolfPy also includes 44 different waste fractions like yard waste, food waste, plastics, or papers, which enables the SwolfPy to model different waste compositions. And SwolfPy also includes 700 life cycle impact assessment methods and 4,300 biosphere flows, which are imported to the Brightway2 from the EcoInvent database. There are 3 options to use the SwolfPy. The first one is the graphical user interface, which is developed using the PySite2 library. The graphical user interface is developed in a way that the user can perform the analysis through the interface with minimum effort and data requirements. The second option is the command line interface, so the user can use it for doing the custom analysis that may not be implemented in the interface. And the last option is using the Jupyter Notebook, which is very helpful to reproduce the results later or in other places. The first step to create a solid waste management system in SwolfPy is to select the collection sectors. The user can have one or more collection sectors, and after that, the user should select the services for collecting the residual waste, organic waste, and recyclable waste. And after that, the user should select the existing processes in the system, like, for example, landfill, waste to energy, composting, or other processes. And in the next step, the user should determine the distances between the processes and also the transportation mode between the processes. And in the next step, the user should allocate the waste products to the available processes. So if we have a composting process, the composting process will produce some residuals, and those residuals can go to the landfill or waste to energy. So the user should allocate the residuals to the landfill or waste to energy, or both of them equally, for example. And after that, the user can see the solid waste management network with the waste flows among the processes, as you can see in the figure here. In the next step, the user can do the comparative life cycle assessment studies, like, for example, we have calculated the global warming potential of sending food waste to 4 different processes like waste to energy, composting, anaerobic digestion, and landfill. And as you can see in the figure, sending the food waste to the landfill has the highest global warming potential, and sending the food waste to the anaerobic digestion has the lowest environmental impact. The user can also do the contribution analysis to see which activity or which emission significantly contribute to the final impact. For example, for the case of sending food waste to the landfill, you can see that the methane emissions are the main contributor to the global warming potential of the landfill. And at the end, the user can also get the life cycle inventory report from the SwolfPy interface for each of the activities, like, for example, sending the food waste to the landfill. Life cycle process models are data intensive, and the input data is usually uncertain. So the user can use the probability distributions to define uncertainty for all the input data, and then run sensitivity analysis or uncertainty analysis, and after that use the SwolfPy interface to visualize the data and plot distributions or correlations. So here's an example which shows the correlation of input parameters with the global warming potential of the landfill when we are sending the food waste to it. And as you can see, for example, the decay rate in landfill is the most important parameter in the landfill. So if you are uncertain about the landfill decay rate, you should pay more attention to it and do the literature review or do more lab tests to define it more accurately, as it has a very high effect on the final results. And the user can also plot the final results based on the input data to see the correlation in the scatter plots or hexabins. So running the uncertainty analysis, for example, for 10,000 iterations, it's computationally intensive and can take a very long time, especially if you are using, for example, common life cycle process models like the ones that we have developed in Excel. But in SwolfPy, we have implemented the Monte Carlo simulation in parallel. So the runs will be divided on all the CPU cores, and you can do, for example, 10,000 iterations in around 17 minutes with a normal Office PC. And we also implemented nonlinear optimization feature in SwolfPy, which helps the user to minimize the environmental impact or cost of the solid waste management system subjected to different policy-related or technical constraints. For example, here is a system with the minimum greenhouse gas emissions. So the system has collected the residual waste and sent it to the waste-to-energy process. And after that, send the bottom ash and fly ash to the landfill, recovers the metals from the waste-to-energy, from the ash in the waste-to-energy, and send them to the reprocessing, and also collect the recyclables in single stream and send them to the single stream MRF, and after that reprocessing. Or the user can add more constraints, like maybe the city doesn't want to use the waste to energy because of the air pollution and also want to divert more than 40% of the waste from the landfill. So the system will solve the problem and send the residual waste to the landfill, add separate collection service for organics to be managed in the AD process, and then send the residuals from the AD process to the landfill. And do the same with the recyclables, collect them in a single stream and send them to the single stream MRF, and after that reprocessing. So we can see the greenhouse gas emissions, diversion, and cost of each system. And you can see that the cost of the system has increased from $51 to $66 because we have added one more collection service. And the greenhouse gas emissions has also increased because we are not using the waste to energy anymore. Documentation for the SwolfPy is available online, and you can check our website to see how to use the graphical user interface or how to use our source code to develop custom models. And installation of the SwolfPy is very easy using the pip command in Python, and it will download all the package from the Python package index website. And at the end, I would like to acknowledge National Science Foundation and also Environmental Research and Education Foundation for supporting this project. If you are interested in SwolfPy, please visit our website, and I would be happy to hear your suggestions for further development of the SwolfPy or take any questions if you have. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that overview of this really helpful tool. Any questions? One question, we have time for one. I didn't see any pop up, so please think about them and perhaps bring them to us towards the end. I'll ask a question at the end too. But I don't think we have any yet, so I'm going to move to our next speaker, but we will revisit here in a little bit. Our next speaker is Dr. Eric Tan, who works at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. He has over a decade of experience working in industry as an engineer. He's an expert on conceptual process design, economics, and sustainability for conversion of biomass to biofuels and chemicals, and has explored other materials as well, carbon nanotubes, fuel cells, hydrogen production, lots of really cool stuff. And today he's going to talk about an integrated sustainability evaluation of biochemical deconstruction and conversion of biomass to fuels via an integrated biorefinery pathway. So even though I know we're kind of mixing bio and waste, but I kind of tend to think about, how could we have these things emerging together? So Eric will not have video today, but he's going to share slides, and share his presentation with us. So take it away, Dr. Tan.
Okay, so hi, my name is Eric Tent. I'm a senior research engineer at National Renewable Energy uh, Laboratory or NREL in Golden, Colorado. So this presentation is based on an integrated process sustainability evaluation performed on a biochemical conversion of a corn stover to a renewable biodiesel blend stock. So, NREL has been playing an important role in developing conversion technologies to produce biofuels and chemicals from different kind of biomass feedstock. We contribute a significant number of conversion pathways in the DOE Bioenergy Technology Office conversion portfolio throughout the years. So, for example, for this in this study, I will present a biochemical conversion pathway that is first the biomass is undergo the pretreatment and then undergo the fermentation, anaerobic fermentations to produce butyric acid intermediate and then upgrade to make biofuels. Okay, so typically, we perform techno-economy analysis and life cycle analysis or supply chain sustainability analysis to evaluate these conversion pathways. Um, for example, for the TEA, it's used to assess the technical and economic feasibility of the new processes or technologies. And it's also used to identify the potential areas for cost cutting. Uh, and it also used to evaluate cross pathways and also cross technology progress. And finally, it is an important analysis because our results are used for the Department of Energy to incorporate those in their portfolio to develop new technology and also for the technology validation. And LCA or supply chain sustainability is performed to estimate the environmental impacts such as greenhouse gas emissions or fossil energy consumptions. And recently, we have started to examine the biorefinery sustainability more holistically. We are focusing on the integration of sustainability in process design. We think this is something important and should be considered a best practice in a biorefinery design, especially in the early stage of the design. So we consider a wider range of sustainability metrics in addition to the economics metrics such as the production cost and also environmental metrics such as the greenhouse gas emissions. We consider many more metrics which allow us to have a more comprehensive direct comparison when we evaluate design modification and also alternatives. And we integrate this sustainability framework in the design so that to help us to understand the impact of a design variation and also help us to evaluate alternative technologies and to track progress. We have a lot of conversion pathway that have a lot of R&D, ongoing R&D. So every year we have to make the update and we can use this to compare. And another thing about doing this is that this type of analysis also capture the multidimensional aspect of a process design and operations. And the result for this kind of study can provide answer to key questions like what process area are in need of sustainability improvement and what are the challenges and opportunities for achieving the best possible sustainability target. And for decision makers and funding agencies is a way to allocate the resources. So the framework I'm talking about here is called Green Scope, and so we will implement Green Scope for the sustainability performance assessment of the biorefinery. This Green Scope framework was actually first developed by researchers in the US EPA, and green scope assess the process employing a set of indicators. There are four areas. Um, we call it four E's here. So it's economy, environmental efficiencies, and energy. So the default framework has over 100 indicators, as you can see here, and we calculate the sustainability scores here. Here, the best value represents 100% sustainability, and the worst case is 0% sustainability. As you can see here, this value is essentially lemon sanders. So a lot of times we can use this for I call it apples to oranges comparison. This is a typical supply chain for a biofuel. So we have a feedstock supply, which is the feedstock production and logistics, and then we have a biomass conversion, which is also known as a biorefinery, and then we have a fuel distribution and vehicle operations. For a typical LCA, we consider the well-to-wheel or the whole entire supply chain life cycles. But for the green scope, we only consider the biorefinery, which is a get-to-get. And this one, and the reason is because this way the designer has the first-hand opportunity to exert any design change to improve the performance of the process. So as mentioned earlier, the case study is a process, is an integrated process that convert corn stover to biofuels, renewable biodiesel, and the intermediate is a carboxylic acid. For this case, it's a butyric acid. So this is the process flow diagram. I'm just quickly to point out a few areas. So we have a biomass coming in, they undergo the pretreatment, and then hydrolysis to make sugars, and then which sent to the fermenters. I mean, this area is essentially this one. So this is anaerobic fermentation to make butyric acid, and then we separate it using membrane separators. This step we call it a protraction, and then undergo the ketonations to make ketones, and then condensations to make oxygenate higher hydrocarbon change, and so on, and then hydrotreating to make biofuels. Additionally, the lignin portion of the biomass is converted to adipic acid as a co-product. So this slide shows the result of a typical result of a green scope tool. So for this case, this is environmental indicators. These are all environmental indicators. So the current results are presented using the radar chart, which is constructed using the corn shell configuration, where the indicator score decrease clockwise, these directions. So the center of the chart represents is 0%, so it's the worst case scenarios. And then the outer the external boundary of the chart is 100%, which represent the 100% sustainable has a 100% sustainability value, and is a best case scenarios. So as you can see here, the majority of the indicators are over 50%, which I consider them as pretty good. And however, there are also few indicators are below 50%. For example, the total solid waste. So this kind of analysis help us to quickly identify what areas need to be addressed in terms of sustainability. And for the total solid waste, because we have several kind of waste in the biorefinery, we have the ash, we have the gypsum, we have lime, and so on. But majority is ash. So, for example, if you want to improve the sustainability of this indicator, we can either receive a feedstock that is with ash pre-removed using any chemical process, or we can just use a different kind of feedstock that has a lower ash. And because I think I am running out of time, so I'm not going to go over the details of the other three categories of indicators. We have energy also, we have efficiency, we also have economy indicators. So I think I've just passed 10 minutes time. So I'm going to stop here, and if you have any questions or interested in learning more, we can talk more during the discussion. Thank you.
Great. So much to think about with that presentation. It's 81 indicators. Really cool. Yeah, so I'll also mention if we have questions, please put them, use the question feature so that we have them organized at the end. And also, feel free to use the chat to ask the presenters. Maybe they'll respond to your questions there as well. I was going to ask if the materials efficiency indicator helps you assess circularity, but that might be a big question. So maybe we'll get to that.
Yes, that's interesting questions. Yeah, I can either answer you now, or we can talk more later. Yeah.
If you have a short version, please do.
Yes,
and maybe we'll revisit.
Yes, I have a short version answer for this. For this particular case, I do not include any circularity type of a matrix. In fact, the original green scope does not have this type of indicators. However, there's a flexibility of adding different kind of indicators that are pertinent to your area. For example, if I'm working on the waste to energy or waste to chemicals or the waste plastic upcycle type of processes, I will probably including that kind of indicators in it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so you actually set up our next speaker, Cindy Azuero, well, because you mentioned the importance of not just thinking about money and carbon, which is something that I am often railing on and I'm very interested in including in more metrics. So Cindy is a PhD student at the H. Milton School of Industrial and Systems Engineering in the Economic Decision Analysis track with a minor in environmental economics. Her research interests are in the applications of economic and engineering tools. We're seeing a lot of this at the conference, right? Optimization, econometrics, and simulation to environmental problems, which include biodiversity, conservation, forests, and climate change. So very excited to see how Cindy is accounting for biodiversity in biopower with carbon capture and storage.
Hello, I want to share my screen.
Okay.
Hello, please present me. I'm Cindy Azuero, and today I'm going to talk to you about biodiversity and climate change impacts of biopower with carbon capture and storage. So you may be all familiar with the controversy around bioenergy, especially with woody biomass, and related mainly to its land use requirements and its potential impacts to biodiversity. So it's a lot of questions about if it's a really good idea to burn trees for power. So to contribute to the discussion, I want to research the question of which are the biodiversity and climate change impacts of biodiversity of biopower with carbon capture and storage. To do this, I developed an LCA study, a tire hybrid LCA, and then use a nonlinear impact assessment method for biodiversity. So I included things such as diesel that is required for some of the processes, especially the wood production, and this is included via an input-output LCA. And then the other processes such as the production of the biomass, the transformation of the biomass into electricity, and carbon capture and storage processes are modeled via a process LCA. This is for woody biomass, and the functional unit is 1 kilowatt hour net of electricity. So then, mostly for the impact assessment, the analysis is made for a 500 megawatt power plant located in southeastern US. So to start the data for the inventories, for the parts that come from the output LCA, the USDIO model is used. And for the process-based LCA, most of the information comes from economists, own calculations, and also from the federal LCA commons. And there are some main assumptions, especially related to the forest industry. So to start, the data is global, but it was extrapolated from Swiss forest data. It is a sustainably managed forest, and it assumes the wood is obtained from extensively managed forest. Here are wood chips. That wood chips are a co-product of the forest industry, where they have a rotation of 130 years. That corresponds to a yield of about 2,600 kilograms per hectare per year. Also, the power plant electric efficiency is 35%. And about the CCS processes, we have an energy penalty because of the capturing unit requires energy of 10.2% and a CO2 removal efficiency of 90%. Also, we included a pipeline leakage of 0.2% per 1,000 kilometers. So, with these assumptions, we take these inventories. These are greenhouse gas emissions and the land use. So, it is to assess biodiversity impacts due to habitat loss. So, first, we can see that with carbon capture and storage, we have bigger inventories compared to without carbon capture and storage. This is mainly because of the energy density, so we need more biomass to obtain the same amount of electricity. Also, we can see that without carbon capture and storage, it is not carbon neutral, so it is not zero, a little bit more. With carbon capture and storage, we have negative emissions. If we want to see a detail of this, we can see here in gray. This will be like the sequestration of emissions while the biomass is growing, and then we can see the percentage of emissions that are due to the combustion. In this case, with carbon capture and storage, it will correspond to the 10% that is not captured. And we can see that the other emissions, for example, the diesel production, the transportation, and the wood chip production are too low compared to the emissions that are released because of combustion. If we translate this for a 500 megawatts power plant, we will have a land requirement of 0.61 hectares of land, and considering the case with carbon capture and storage, mitigating to about 2.1 megatons of CO2 equivalent per year. So then we want to assess the biodiversity for these 500 megawatts power plant. I am using modified countryside SAR model. So the idea is that we want to estimate the amount of the species that will be lost between an original scenario and a future scenario. The future scenario being the one in which we are supplying the land for the biomass production. So in this model, we have 5 taxa: mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and vascular plants, and we have 6 different land use types: intensive forestry, extensive forestry, annual crops, permanent crops, pasture, and urban. The idea is that we will estimate the future amount of the species due to the relationship between the area available for species in the future scenario and the area available for species in the original scenario. Take, for example, the future scenario. This is composed by the amount of future natural habitat that will be, and also by this second term, that in a sense represents the amount of human modified habitat that is available for species. This is because the countryside SAR model includes this age parameter that reflects the affinity of each taxa to each land use type in each ecoregion. Being the ecoregion one geographical characterization where these ecoregions share species, dynamics, and environmental conditions. So the data for this model comes from Chowdhury et al. 2015 for current land cover. So for our specific LCA for the biopower plant, this will be our future scenario. So we already saw that we will need 0.61 megahectares of land to supply the biomass required. So we will supply that amount of land with a mix of current natural habitat and current existing extensively managed forest. And we will obtain the wood from an extensively managed forest to be consistent with the LCA. Where do we obtain the land from? Here, the scenario is assuming that it will be from one ecoregion, the southeastern mixed forest. So it is this yellow one that it's on the figure that we see in here. So under this scenario, first, if we discuss the biodiversity loss, regional biodiversity loss due to habitat loss, we can see that if in the worst case scenario, where we assume that all that land, that 0.61 mega hectares of land, come from natural habitat, we will be losing about 22 species regionally, from which most of them are plants, and the next taxa more affected are birds. Then, if we want to analyze how these impacts change when the mix change, we go from 100% supplied with natural habitat to 0%, where 0% will mean that all the land is supplied by currently existing extensively managed forests. In this case, we see that the worst case, as I mentioned, it's about 22 species regionally, and in the case where everything is supplied with extensively managed forest is 0, mainly because we will not be changing the type of land use. So we will already have extensively managed forest, and we need the wood from extensively managed forest. So there's no change in the amount of area available for species. So it's 0. We can also estimate a global impact in a species, so a global equivalent species loss, using the vulnerability scores also from Shalhari that reflects the endemism of the species within the ecoregion. So in this case, we see that if we translate that to global, the numbers reduce a lot, mainly because most of these species in that specific ecoregion are not endemic to that ecoregion. But also we know that one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss is climate change, and we want to compare these two impacts that we have from BECCS in this case on biodiversity. So as an initial estimation, this is intended to be improved. I use recipe, and we wanted to ask how many species will be lost if those 2.1 megatons of CO2 equivalent are not mitigated. So in that case, we will have lost estimated initial estimation 5.88 species. This means that by using the biopower, we will be avoiding to lose these 5.88 species. So if we give an initial gross comparison, we can say that this impact, this benefit of a species is bigger than the negative effect on biodiversity due to habitat loss. However, we have to be careful with this comparison because the species that are affected by increases in temperature are different to the species that may be affected by habitat loss. So in conclusion, most of the CO2 emissions inside the biopower plant comes from the combustion processes. For a 500 megapower power plant, climate change impacts are estimated to be 1.79 megatons of CO2 equivalent per year without the carbon capture and storage, and a mitigation of 2.1 megatons of CO2 per year with carbon capture and storage. Also, these 0.61 mega hectares of land that are required to supply the biomass, in the worst case scenario where we supply that land with all natural, that will be approximately losing 44% of the natural area in that ecoregion currently. We will lose approximately 22 species regionally. And the initial estimation suggests that the species benefit due to climate change may be bigger than the species loss due to habitat loss. Thank you. And if you have more questions, you can write me or you can put it on the chat.
Great. I have one quick question, and others, yeah, please add them as you go. You were focusing on woody biomass, correct? Just
yes.
Woody biomass. Okay, that was what I wanted to ask. And yeah, maybe that's enough for now.
Okay.
But really interesting. And I'm sure that you're well aware that if you talk to ecologists, which I have, about biodiversity indicators in LCA, they are just shocked, I guess, about what we do, how we take this kind of information. And I just wonder if, you've experienced that and sort of how you address those kind of critiques. Because these, people are kind of used to looking at like a field and getting into all these insects, and we're kind of making more sweeping assumptions, which I think sometimes we have to do to not get bogged down in the weeds. But I wonder, just if you quickly maybe tell us your experience with that.
Yeah, it's been a mix because I'm aware that it's more complex. It's to create an indicator. This, for example, does only include the species diversity. It does not include functional diversity, genetic diversity. So we have to be really careful with the conclusions of these numbers. But to reach like an intermediate point, I didn't emphasize too much on this, but usually impact assessment methods on LCA are linear. So biodiversity is the typical case where linear impacts does not make a lot of sense. We have these carrying capacities, and yeah, there is a point where just if you take one piece of land additional, you will be losing like everything. So this is why I go back a step and I use a nonlinear methodology. And actually, these SARS methods come from ecology. So I hope that with that, I'm like in an intermediate point. I know it's a first approach and it could be improved, but yeah.
Got to start somewhere. Yeah, we have to start somewhere. So great, thank you. And we'll hear more from Dr. Therasme later, who's at SUNY ESF. So his forestry experience may also have some more to share with us. And maybe I should have put you back to back. So anyway, but our next talk is from Paula Mendoza Moreno from Colorado State University. And she is a chemical and biological engineering student from Venezuela. And she works with Dr. Justin Quinn and intends to pursue a career in bioenergy and sustainable development. And is talking to us today about this cool plant called, I don't want to say it wrong, but guayule. Well, Paula will say it correctly. Bagasse into biofuels. Hello.
Hopefully you can hear me.
Can hear you. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you for the intro. Oh, yes, I want to share my screen.
Take your time. Yeah.
It looks like I'm having, I think I need to restart Chrome. So maybe the next speaker can go first and then I'll jump after that person.
Thanks for your willingness to maybe go a little bit earlier. So we have Dr. Obste, I said it wrong, Therasme, from SUNY ESF. He's an assistant professor focusing on Willow and energy systems, as well as sustainability assessments of these systems. So we have another talk about woody biomass and carbon capture and sequestration. So hopefully we get a deeper knowledge of this space. So I'll turn it over to you. Looks like you're all ready to share. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. This presentation will focus on the life cycle assessment of Willow biomass system to produce net negative carbon fuel. Before I get started, I would like to give credit to my co-authors, Timothy Vogt, Mary Odell Fortier, Mark Eisenbees, and Thomas Amiden. Without them, this work would not be possible. So this presentation is organized as follows. First, I'll start to give some background information. Then I'll be transitioning to the method that was used, which is life cycle assessment. And I'll jump to some of the key results before I share some of the conclusion with you. There's three sectors in reference to transportation, electricity generation, and industry. Altogether, they contribute to about 77% of the total greenhouse gas emission in the United States in 2019. If we compare the emission from transportation alone to the 1990 level, we'll see an increase of about 23%. Although we have witnessed a decrease of about 5% of those numbers since 2005, it is still low compared to the 12% decrease for all the other sectors combined. In New York State, for example, the story is still the same. It's not so different than what is happening at the national level. Transportation is still the leading sector in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but this time with an even higher share of greenhouse gas emission that can reach up to 37%. And this is data from the NYSERDA in 2016. If we kind of take one step back, I know that you all are familiar with those reports, but I would like to bring you to think about them because they kind of warn us that immediate actions are needed to limit global warming. One of those reports is from the National Academy of Science, which called for an 80 to 100% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector. And also the 2018 IPCC report called for net zero emissions around 2050 to limit global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level. On the same IPCC report, if we think about some of those other scenarios where we delay the mitigation actions to reach the same goal of 1.5 degrees C by 2050, we will need to deploy some net negative technology that will let us to reach net negative emissions by 2050 and beyond. As you can think about it, many regions around the world are planning to move toward this carbon neutral economy. For example, if we think about New York State, through the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is often referred as the CLCPA for short, New York State aimed to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Also, by reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 85%. As we can think about those goals, to reach them, we'll need some sort of combination between natural climate solutions and also engineering strategies to replace fossil-based fuel in those energy systems. This kind of brings us to think about products that are net negative. So if we shift the thinking from a system or country or state-based to a single product, it is my opinion that life cycle assessment is one of the best tools that we can use to do those quantification. If, for example, we think about the impact of biofuels that we use in the transportation sector, the environmental impact do not only happen at the tailpipe of the car or a plane, but instead we need to kind of incorporate all of the different life cycle, the impact at the different life cycle stages, starting from the feedstock production, transportation, biomass processing, or even conversion, to end up with the combustion itself that occur at that produce carbon dioxide in the tailpipe of the car. So thinking about the production of biomass, one of the most attractive group of feedstock that we can use is what we refer to energy crops. And according to the 2016 billion ton report, energy crop in the US could reach up to 411 to 736 million ton of biomass per year in 2040. And shrub willow, which I'm going to talk about today, is one of those energy crops. It has a short rotation period of 3 to 4 years before we harvest it. It has some desirable characteristics, especially when we think about its ability to produce high yield in low quality soil, low maintenance requirements, and the ability to harvest it over multiple rotation. And here we think about 7 times without replanting. So this harvested biomass can be processed by using various pretreatment and conversion pathways to produce fuels, chemicals, and different forms of energy. So one of the novel approaches that add valorization to the wood chips is the hot water extraction process. It was kind of being developed at SUNY ESF, and currently it's under commercialization by a company called ABS. This process uses high temperature to initiate an hydrolysis reaction to yield two different streams of product. One, the pathway A that lead to extracted woody biomass, which is solid, that has very interesting properties in terms of higher heating value, etc. And we have the liquid stream, which is mostly in water-based extract solution. The solution, which refers to the pathway B, can be further processed to yield some organic acids such as acetic acid, and also produce fermentable sugars that can be used to produce many fuels or chemicals. This kind of brings us to ask the question, can we produce net negative greenhouse gas emission transportation fuels from willow biomass without really having to use those advanced engineering technology to capture the carbon in itself? To address this question, we decide to perform a cradle-to-grave life cycle assessment. This analysis kind of incorporates different land use change scenario. For example, switching from cropland to grassland, and from cropland to willow, or from grassland to willow, and incorporate different harvesting season and also different sources of energy to meet the energy demand for the biorefinery. Here we present some of the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions for 1 megajoule of ethanol that is produced from the fermentation of sugars that are derived from the willow extraction, from those various scenarios that I mentioned in the previous slide. So we kind of show here the result when we use a fraction of the biomass to produce the fuel to meet the energy demand of the biorefinery, although we do not present the one that uses natural gas. We'll talk about those results in a minute or two. Taking into some of the scenarios that kind of combine wood chips that produced on land that were previously cropland and where a fraction of the biomass is being combusted on site. So those will lead to net negative greenhouse gas emissions, regardless on whether we do a summer harvest versus a winter harvest. So this net negative greenhouse gas emissions is due to the carbon that is sequestered in the wood system, and also the increase in the soil organic carbon when we switch from cropland to willow. When it comes to grassland scenarios, those ones, they do not lead to negative greenhouse gas fuels, but instead to low carbon fuels. And those we can reach reduction of 50 to 60% of greenhouse compared to petroleum gasoline. And those difference in the result is mainly because when we did the analysis to identify the lands that we will be using, so we found that there were about 10% only of the suitable land that were grassland, meaning that we will need to have a longer travel distance to collect the same amount of biomass to supply the biorefinery. So in both cases, we noticed that the below ground carbon pool has a big influence on the result. Also, when we use fossil-based resources such as natural gas to meet the energy demand, so we have kind of two different set of results. For the grassland, we might end up with a higher impact compared to natural gas. Thinking a little bit about the below ground carbon surface, so there are three different pools: the soil organic carbon, the stool, and coarsewood and leaf decay. The main difference is between the soil organic carbon. When we switch from cropland to grassland, we have an increase in the soil organic carbon, and when we switch to grassland to willow, we end up losing some of the soil organic carbon. This is the main difference between those two. So in terms of sensitivity analysis, the results are not consistent. Depend on the scenario, we might end up with different parameters that have the most sensitive. We can talk about this if you have some questions. It seems like over the time limits that was provided. So in terms of conclusion, if we kind of use biomass to meet the energy demand, and we can get negative carbon fuel. This is the case for willow that are grown on previous grassland. However, if we use, on previous cropland. However, if we use grassland, so we might end up with low carbon fuel, but we will have to use biomass in this case. In the case that we use natural gas, we might take different approach to reduce the impact from the grassland. So this paper was already published earlier this year. If you want to get more information, you can check it out. And with that, I will thank you very much for your attention, and we'll be ready to take more questions later.
Great, thank you. I'll ask a quick question. What time scale did you use to think about the accumulation of carbon in the subsurface in particular?
So for the analysis, we consider a period of 7 rotation of shrub willow.
Okay.
So for that, the first year we have the copies, and we had the last year, so that gave us a total period of 23 years.
23 years.
Although we do not have experimental data for that entire period, I think we had data for the 3rd rotation.
Okay.
What we did was we assumed that after the 3rd rotation, there is no additional accumulation of carbon on the ground. This is just a conservative approach. So we don't know what happened at the 4th or 5th rotation at this stage.
Okay, thank you. I know that time dimension is important, and it's hard to get those numbers kind of with a lot of certainty. So yeah, thank you for commenting on that. And yeah, if there's more questions, please put them in the chat. Please use the question feature. We can publish them in a little bit. And Paula, are you, is your technology cooperating with you?
Okay, I should be good to go now.
Okay, great.
That worked. Awesome. Hopefully you can see my screen. Hi everyone, my name is Paula Mendoza, and I'm a recent graduate from Colorado State University, and this topic is economic and environmental sustainability assessment of guayule bagasse to fuel pathways. So let me start with the motivation for this project. So this research stems from the need for solutions to environmental, economic, and social sustainability in the Southwest United States in the context of drought. So in the year 2000, the Western US entered the beginning of the worst mega drought in over 1,000 years that we've had, and that has set the stage for expected extreme dry conditions, water restrictions, and dangerous fire seasons ahead, as we experienced during last year's fire season in California and Colorado, which have been the worst in the modern history of the West. So this represents a risk to agricultural operations and the people who depend on it in this area. And that's not only the farmers who obviously depend on the economic operations, but also all of us, because it's arid lands in the affected states are an integral part of the country's productive capacity. So the West is responsible for the cultivation of many agricultural goods that take up a lot of water to grow, and they feed a lot of people. Therefore, it is important that we think about our next steps facing this mega drought and develop new strategies that sustain rural economies in this area. So in light of this issue, I introduced the Sustainable Bioeconomy for Arid Regions effort, which is looking to identify and support sustainable methods for crop production to manage this drought and meet the water restrictions that come with it. So this research focuses on the development of guayule, which is a perennial crop. It is a potential high-value crop that is interesting because it is drought and heat tolerant, and it can grow on marginal lands that could provide high economic returns because it has a high natural rubber content. And it could grow under variable desert conditions. So my work builds upon past work that has been done on the modeling of a guayule rubber extraction facility. This work investigated the economic and environmental implications of a large-scale biorefinery like this one. The natural rubber extraction process has two byproducts in addition to the rubber. So there is a natural resin, and there is the remaining lignocellulosic biomass that we refer to as bagasse. So this research confirmed that the value of these byproducts are very critical to the economic sustainability of the process. So past work has focused on the economics and applications of the resin, which we now know to be the most significant unknown within the guayule supply chain. And on the other hand, there's the bagasse, which represents almost 90% of the plant after the extraction process, but we don't know what could be the best processing pathway for it after the rubber extraction. What could be the best path that could be in the best economic and environmental interest of the process. So as a result, in this work, I developed process models with the following techno-economic analysis and life cycle assessment for two separate guayule bagasse to energy pathways. So the first pathway is the pelletization, transportation, and combustion of the bagasse. And the second is the conversion of the bagasse to biofuels, followed by also distribution and combustion of that fuel. The system boundary of this work starts from the cultivation of guayule, which is then sent to a natural rubber extraction facility, and then the two separate conversion pathways of interest. And for life cycle assessment purposes, we consider sequestration of carbon dioxide into the biomass and emissions from the upstream materials and energy consumed during production, distribution, and combustion of that resulting fuel. The process models of this work were done using Aspen Plus, and this process model fed into the economic analysis, which was done using VBA, and the life cycle assessment, which was done using OpenLCA with the database EcoInvent via Tracy. So onto the results. First, for the pellet production system, the system consisted of a wetting step to increase the moisture of the bagasse, then a pelletization unit, and then a drying unit. So it is a very straightforward process. The overall yield of this process is 95% of the wet bagasse, and the resulting pellets have a heating value of 25 megajoules per kilogram. And these pellets can be used for large-scale combined heat and power facilities, for district heating, for industrial thermal applications, absorbing contaminating water, and cooking. So they're very versatile. Now, in the pyrolysis system, the system is based largely on a previously published tail gas reactive pyrolysis system, where this is different from a regular pyrolysis because a part of the gas that is formed in the pyrolysis reactor is recycled back into that same chamber, so as to create a reactive atmosphere that results in a bio-oil that is easier to upgrade to a biofuel that is of interest, so it's not as intensive. And this process has an overall yield of 16%, and it's broken down into mostly gasoline and some jet fuel and diesel. The economic results are presented here. So this is a graph of a breakdown of the production costs of biofuels via pyrolysis. And the minimum fuel selling price for this system was calculated to be a little over $9 per gallon of gasoline equivalent, which is significantly above both biofuels from other biomasses and conventional fuel. And this is mainly due to the low yield of 16% compared to other processes, which are anywhere between 35 and 65% yield. So way below that. And additionally, the value of the bagasse purchased in the system is significantly higher than the price of biomass in other papers. And notice that the greater contributors to production costs are the purchasing of the biomass, labor and maintenance costs, and the hydrogen that is used in the upgrading process. Results of the sensitivity analysis of this system show that this minimum fuel selling price is most sensitive to uncertainties in the bio-oil yield, the amount of bagasse that enters the system, and the capital costs of the system. The economic results for pellet production resulted in a minimum pellet selling price of $169 per ton of pellets, and these results are actually more in line with the typical selling price of pellets from other biomasses. And similarly, the greater contributor for this system is the purchasing of the bagasse. So not surprisingly, the sensitivity analysis shows that this selling price is also most sensitive to the price and flow rate of the bagasse, as well as the equipment costs. So to compare these two systems, which is the whole point of modeling both, these results were normalized to a per megajoule basis. Again, this is the same breakdown of production costs, but with a different functional unit. The main takeaway from this comparison is that it costs a lot less to produce a megajoule worth of pellets than it takes to produce a megajoule of biofuels. However, we have to be critical when we think about what this megajoule means, because while it is great that pellets are cheap, biofuels have an advantage, and it is that we cannot put pellets in a car, but we can put biofuel in a car and hopefully replace fossil-based energy, and that has an advantage when it comes to the environmental impact of the system. So this figure shows the relative contributions of operations to the following TRACY categories for the environmental results. So across all these categories, the results show that most of the environmental burden of the system associated with the process comes from the burden that comes with the bagasse after the extraction process, before it enters the biorefinery, as well as the final combustion of the fuel. With regards to processing of the bagasse, particularly in the global warming potential category, natural gas would be the next contributor to emissions. Similarly, for the pellet production system, the burden of the bagasse and combustion of fuel had the most impact across all categories, and the operations and utilities themselves actually had a very little impact, and that is the small other category that shows up in a light green. Most importantly from this work, we want to focus on the global warming potential. When compared to each other, again, a megajoule of pellets is less harmful to produce than a megajoule of biofuels, but thanks to quantifying these values, we can actually compare these energy carriers to conventional fuels. And this is where biofuels are very advantageous. And that is because while pellets from bagasse are not displacing fossil fuel-based energy sources, biofuels are. And thanks to the fact that this is a renewable source of energy, and there's a carbon sink associated with it during cultivation, we can actually save up to 58% less emissions using fuels from bagasse compared to conventional fuels. So in conclusion, the process models, along with the sustainability analysis of this work, show that pellets are cheap to make, and they could be sold as fuel, and they do so with little environmental impact. Therefore, this pathway is an awesome short-term solution for the bagasse in support of a bigger guayule-based economy. On the other side, biofuels via pyrolysis are not very competitive with other biofuels, and they're even less competitive with conventional fuels in the economic side of things. However, environmentally, they represent an opportunity to displace more than half the impact that conventional fuels have on climate change. So tips to make biofuels work from this would be by focusing on the price of the bagasse and the hydrogen, so that we could reduce production costs for this process. And one way to make the bagasse cheaper is by increasing the efficiency of the natural rubber extraction process, or by increasing the value of the resin byproduct. And on the other hand, we can investigate hydrogen use and source costs. So some processes generate hydrogen on site instead of just buying it, and this is something that future work could consider. Additionally, other processes could be investigated in models such as gasification of the bagasse instead of pyrolysis. And finally, the idea is for these results to be integrated into a bigger model within the guayule rubber supply chain, instead of treating it as a standalone work, and see the advantages and disadvantages that this has on the commercialization of guayule. So that concludes my talk, and yeah, I look forward to questions. I would appreciate some feedback on this work.
Awesome. Any audience questions to start with? I have a question, and this is a little bit radical, I guess to say, but I have a question about, just generally as a researcher, when we find that a system that produces energy, for example, the guayule, right, is grown in a drought-prone area. I'm assuming that it's grown, I don't know if these are big monoculture plantations or if they're sort of acceptable in a biodiversity sense, but you know, if you find that growing this material produces energy that is useful for us and is not as detrimental to many systems as fossil fuels, any thoughts about, you know, this is a big philosophical question about, like, should we be sort of trying to make the economic system support these things, or do we just have to say, oh, well, it's too expensive and so we can't do it? That wasn't the most eloquent, but, you know, how do we kind of, I'm just in a lot of meetings where we sort of constrain the choice set by just saying, oh, it's too expensive and so we can't. And I don't, yeah, I wonder what you think about that.
Okay, let me grab the that was a lot of good ideas, right? I think the whole point of focusing on a plant like this would be the fact that you can grow it in a place where, if we continue the way we're going, we're not going to be able to grow many things. So, you know, farmers can't grow most of the things because it's very hot and variable climate and very little water. This can be a solution for them. So that's why it's an incorporation of all types of sustainability, including social sustainability. And the idea of using these tools also, right, of using economic and environmental analysis to assess these processes, is that we can say, hey, we should focus on this 2 or 3 things, and hopefully we can make them sustainable, and that can be in the interests of both the economics and the farmers who are going to grow them and the people who are going to benefit from the products. So be that the fuel or the resin, which is being investigated, or the natural rubber that comes from, that really is the main product of the process. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, I'm just, so these farmers in the Southeast, I mean, are they currently growing something else? Are these people growing, like, for example, cotton, which is, I think, really insane that we do that down there? Would they be, I mean, are these farmers that exist and you're targeting people that as they transition to a more water scarce environment that they can,
Yeah, so as far the project as a whole, they work with the farmers to see if that's feasible. The thing is that we can't, unless we propose an entirely feasible process to the farmers, they're not going to want to change a crop. So I can't go to the farmer and say, well, guayule is awesome, and you can sell it and they're going to buy it from you, if I can't say that with certainty, right? So they're going to say, I'm not going to change my entire crop production, just not being 100% sure that that is the right path.
Yes, an endless challenge in agriculture is that the profit margins are really tight, and because we don't value externalities at all. Okay, any questions from the audience for any of our presenters? I'm not sure. I think Megan was going to put everybody on the podium. so we could ask questions to anyone. I did have a question for everyone about, some of you, we did expand the metrics to beyond just carbon a little bit and economics, but I wonder if you all could comment on how do you choose sustainability metrics that you think are critical to assess these technology options, and or might they vary by geography and feedstock, or how do we start to think about what metrics we really should be including when evaluating these systems? For example, I study a lot of food and ag systems, and I think that if we're not including nutrients, that we're not doing our job, because there's also a very, very clear trade-offs between carbon and nitrogen, for example. So that's something that I think about a lot, and I wonder what you all think about your unique systems, or which metrics you want to really see becoming more and more just routinely included in these kinds of assessments. Any thoughts? Maybe about biodiversity?
Yeah, I'm gonna step in. I think a way to start is, as you said, in your case, it is clear that it could be a trade-off between nitrogen and carbon. When we talk about forest, the first thing you think is, oh, we're cutting forest. So as you just said, it is important not to just think of carbon. We cannot be solving one problem at the expense of the others, and we can find trade-offs, but we also can find synergies. So I think the idea will be to include all the indicators as possible, but since there are usually data limitations, time limitations, I think the best exercise that we can start at least with is for each process to think which additional impacts besides carbon we could have for this specific process, and based on that, include at least those that at first seems to be really obvious, maybe to start with.
Yeah. Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in and say that I agree with the point that Cindy made. Although I would say, like, for a particular analysis, you get to pay attention to the goal of your analysis, what you really wanted. For example, in my analysis, I was looking into the impact of biofuels, but because our major concern was how can we reach net negative greenhouse gas emissions, for that particular analysis, we just look into climate change. But if the question was framed in a broader sustainability question, so at this stage, we will have to consider some other impact categories. And I agree with Sandy to say, like, we include as many as possible, although we recognize many of them we have limitation in terms of data collection.
Yes, the data collection. I don't know if any of you have come across, and I think more of us are trying to do this, is also to, because Paula mentioned, at the end of the day, if farmers aren't convinced, none of this will happen, right? And so some people are advocating for more of us LCA practitioners to really talk to our stakeholders and ask them, what do you hope we're going to be able to do? And then try to start having our analyses be more tailored to that end, as opposed to them being sort of academic exercises. And I'm trying to start doing that in my own work, but it is very challenging, right? Really challenging. So I don't know if any of you have had experience with that, or have tried to increasingly include kind of stakeholder perspective, which is often very different than anything that we would perhaps come up with as academic researchers. Kind of more of a comment, but. Like with SwolfPy, hopefully I have a project in the next year that our intention is that we're going to start right off with just talking with waste managers and showing them the model. And I'm curious to see if it makes sense to them, right? And then trying to figure out how we set up our scenario analysis to kind of tailor their specific needs, which are often, right, if you go to one location versus another, there's going to be different issues and concerns. So I don't know. Yeah, you probably all are dealing with some of that on some level, which is nice why we have these tools that we can be adaptable with, right? I think I see almost all of us doing that here at the conference, so good luck to us. I don't know if, or optimization. Working on being able to visualize for people kind of this efficient frontier, saying, well, if we kind of want to choose this or that, and like, where is the decision in this space, and where are we explicitly making a trade-off, I think is becoming increasingly common and necessary. I'm excited to see. I was in industrial engineering department for like 2 years, and love working with IEs. They really are really good at thinking about wicked problems and trying to quantify the really difficult to quantify.
Yeah, just what you just mentioned is part of also what I'm also researching for my thesis, and it's basically that, like, integrate this biodiversity assessment into an optimization model which allow us to supply this land for BECS in an optimal way, or minimizing biodiversity impact subject to supplying the amount of BECS, or the reverse, like minimizing cost subject to respect some biodiversity, and construct the Pareto frontier, the efficiency frontier, to really see the trade-off and what's feasible.
Right, and there might not be a solution, but there might be, and each location is going to kind of make a different set, and hopefully we're helping people to kind of edge towards the best choice in real time, right? Because we also don't have time, right? We have to keep moving, like the world keeps plugging along, and so we're just trying to do our best each time. When we think about a big thing like building a waste-to-energy facility, we don't want to do that wrong, because we're going to have it until it dies, which is often way later than it probably should, 50 years later, right? Really challenging questions. Yeah. Any other comments that you all would like to share about continuing to integrate LCA and optimization and including more variables and trying to make huge decisions in the face of vast uncertainty as the climate is changing?
So I think we saw different models for calculating the life cycle assessment of processes today. For example, we have a similar model for gasification model using the Aspen Plus for the solid-based gasification. And at NCSZ, we think that it's very good if you could gather all these processes and, for example, use one system and add all of them to one, for example, or other like OpenLCA software, and then compare all these models together to get consistent results and see what's the effect of input data or regional effects of, for example, parameters in different countries to get more consistent results, and also that we can share our knowledge with the stakeholders and industry.
That's a great suggestion. Yes, being able to represent the variety, really, right? And get a sense of, it's hard to figure out. We each have a module, like, everybody's, I use DecoInvent, I use this one module in there, but how do we, we all know that it's not always perfectly representing our actual reality, and that's always a huge challenge in LCA. And can we do our best to represent a range, and how do we know when that specific location? It's really an ongoing, really huge challenge for us, especially as things get more and more specific to like individual locations, and we're getting more advanced, so it's not as, we can't just be like, oh, these are the 5 values that I found, right? We kind of are more like, well, what is the process really like? And sometimes it's not even built yet, right? Sometimes we're doing anticipatory or exploratory things, and that's another whole challenge. Which maybe I wonder if the guayule project has been going on for a long time, and I wonder if you all have, maybe you don't know this, but have you, over time, how you represent that particular those processes, has it changed as you've gathered more information? Did anything massive change, or has anybody noticed that? Like, as we've developed the ability to actually extract the resin or do the pyrolysis perfectly, have you noticed that our ability to model it in LCA has improved, or anything drastic? Has anybody seen anything like that? Maybe the audience has some thoughts too, but
when it comes to LCA, there are some models that by modeling, there's a lot of information during the rubber extraction process. So I think that's gotten better throughout the years. It is very old, and getting natural rubber really is a very old process. So they've gone from solvent extraction. We've gotten to solvent extraction from other methods that weren't very efficient. But there is some lack of information when it comes to life cycle assessment for processing specifically the gas. That's what we're trying to do, is be able to put that out there.
Yeah, great, thank you. Wonderful. I guess. Go ahead.
And if the audience is interested in a biofuel progress, for example, DOE's Bioenergy Technology Office website, you can find a lot of reports. There are reports that track the progress of a certain conversion pathways for many years. You can see every year they make an update, and which part of the technology has improved and what are the corresponding economy and environmental improvement as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's really, thank you for mentioning that. I've been looking for data sets to just look at that problem, right? How do we, because we're all doing it. I mean, we're trying to do LCAs on things that people are only making at the bench, and we're guesstimating. But it'd be neat to look at really how a particular technology advanced over time. Thank you for that, Eric. It is 7 o'clock here on the East Coast, so we should conclude. I hope that you all maybe will consider coming to session tomorrow at this time, where we'll be talking about nutrient cycling. So if you're interested in biosystems, that might be of interest to you. And otherwise, I will hopefully see you all at some point in this virtual space or in the real world in the next year or so. Thank you all for your great presentations. Appreciate it. And if you have any questions, obviously reach out to these researchers. And thanks for your attention.